All right, everyone. Welcome to what I consider to be the fun part of the videos. We are now going to start talking about sculpting and how I like to approach sculpting something like this. Now, you remember in the one of the previous videos where I talked about how I made a list of the materials of the asset, which I can bring over here. So I went through all of this and I did, made notes, and actually Maven made notes, and wood, leather, bronze, rope, opal, glass, herbs, stone. So the reason I went ahead and wrote all this stuff down and kind of studied this earlier is because, well, we're going to be sculpting these different types of materials. So that's sort of how I like to break all of this down. And since wood seems to be the, dominant sort of material, this thing's pretty much, I'd say, maybe 90% made of wood, we're going to go ahead and start there. There are so many different types of ways to sculpt wood. And I would just say, regards to saying that this is a stylized prop, well, that just means that it's not going to, it will mimic reality in some way, but it's not going to appear to be something that you would probably see in the real world. And that's as loose as I can kind of go off of as far as, defining what stylized is. So, if you were going to do a prop like this and you wanted to do it, say, in the style of, League of Legends or World of Warcraft, those are the only two styles that come to mind right now that are like highly stylized. Well, then you would want to gather a bunch of reference of wood and of different types of materials, and then you'd want to try to translate that in the sculpt. So when you're doing a sculpt like this and you don't know where to begin, maybe just start looking at a bunch of different references of what stylized is, something that appeals to you. I have a lot of Pinterest boards that I go to, when I'm looking for reference for, different stylized pieces of work. And that's not necessarily limited to video games. That could be, paintings that people have done, digital paintings, real life paintings, oil paintings. So I just kind of wanted to, talk about that because, I'm going to be using a lot of different types of alphas and whatnot for the sculpt. And something that I always thought, especially when I was a student, was, and maybe some of you can relate, was that if I used anything other than the default brushes and whatnot that ZBrush provided, then it wasn't necessarily like my work, right? Like if I went and downloaded a bunch of alphas that someone had made and then I start using them, I always thought that, maybe my work wasn't as authentic because I didn't actually make it, which now of course is just, that's just not true, because if you're working in a studio, you are most likely going to be sharing alphas, sharing tools, sharing a lot of different stuff. And at the end of the day, it's about just getting the work done as efficiently and as best as you can, to the best of your ability. So I say that, to try to encourage you, use alphas, you can try making some of your own if you'd like to, but just don't buy into the lie that I did, that just because they're not your alphas, that it's not your work per se, because, to be honest, I see a lot of when stylized games come out, I do kind of, as artists, we pay attention to the aesthetics of things, and I definitely see a lot of times I see a lot of wood alphas actually used quite a bit in various games that I've either purchased myself off of, the ArtStation marketplace, or I've seen other people use. So, people in the industry, they use each other's alphas, and it's, at the end of the day, it's about us getting the work done. With that said, I will be showing you some alphas that I'll be using for doing this wood. It's actually going to be a technique that I was familiar with, but I never actually have done it on any projects necessarily, using this technique. So I'll get into that in just a second. But first, let's just kind of talk about, like, I'm going to start with this section of the wood because that makes the most sense. I think what I'll do, actually seeing this now, what I'll do is I'm going to just separate this centerpiece because this actually wouldn't be connected necessarily to these larger three pieces. So I'm just going to take this and I'm going to do a split hidden. There we go. Before I do any alpha work, what I like to do first is I like to sculpt the edge wear, edge wear and damages. So if I go ahead and bring over the concept, we can kind of just take a look. Now there's a lot of implied markings on here that, depending on who's looking at it, it could be perceived as damage. For instance, if I just kind of like zero in here, I see, there's some markings right here, maybe this, maybe a couple of dings here. So, I mean, they're so loosely done, and that's what I really like about Maeve's concept, is that it's open for interpretation, right? Like, you can see there's some obvious marks that I'll probably try to put in right here, potentially here and here, stuff like that. So those are good things to pay attention to, because, the concept artist, in this case, like Maeve, might have put that there for a reason. But, with a lot of concept artists I've worked with, they'll tell me that it's just kind of open to interpretation, just because, I've worked with a lot of really great concept artists who trust their artist to deliver their concept and make it reality. So, a lot of these edges are fairly clean, and I'm going to kind of keep it that way. I don't think that we need to really go too crazy with the edge wear, just because I think that can start to get really noisy, and it can sort of subtract from the overall, piece, what's going on. So let's go ahead and start this. So right now, these edges are looking pretty sharp. They just came right out of Maya. So one thing I do like to do is I'll just go ahead and start to, kind of look at this and smooth it out a little bit. And just, you can see how you can kind of start getting a bevel with this wood here. So that's something I really like. With a lot of stylized work, you'll see that a lot of things are just really beveled pretty heavily. So you don't want to go too crazy, but just enough. Like, you obviously, what you don't want, you don't want to push the brush in like really hard and smooth it, because it will actually start to deform the silhouette. And we're gonna try to keep that silhouette there. And I do like this right here. You see how that's starting to separate these two wood pieces? That's what we want. And you'll notice too, in just a little bit, why doing this helps. We actually start to sculpt the actual, wood damage. So I think this should work from our purposes right now. I think, there's always a potential to come back and smooth out some of those edges. But you can see, I mean, the difference between some of these, like the edges just get super harsh and crisp. So now what we can do, for any of you who have seen my previous videos, you'll know that I talk a lot about the Trim Smooth Border brush and how it's like, one of my absolute favorite brushes, and it still is. For doing stuff that's like pretty like heavily stylized, something like this, doing edge wear like this, as I'm doing now, it can be okay. Part of the reason I kind of steer away from it in this case is just because when you start to like go and sculpt some of the edges, you see how it just kind of, and I kind of lazily did this, but even if I tried to come in here and sculpt kind of, with an intention, like it still kind of works. You're getting some of that, the nice edge damage, but it's just kind of hard to control, making the brush be, making it fairly simple. And what I mean by that is, if I take the planer brush, and the hotkey is BPL, if I take the planer brush and put a square alpha on it, I'm gonna make this a little bit larger. I find that this brush makes your cuts to be, like it's simple. It's like a sheer cut, like if I just lightly put it down, it doesn't leave a lot of artifacting like the Trim Smooth Border brush does. And the larger that you make your brush, the more intense it's going to be, which, can actually work out in some cases. And then what you can do, you see how we have sort of these like little, for lack of a better term, these little kind of nubbins right here that kind of stick out, and even right here. So Orb has actually made a brush that works super well to get rid of that, and it's called the Orb Flatten brush. And I'm actually not going to put any alphas on it, just use it as a standalone brush, and I'm just gonna go through and go over those areas. You see how it just kind of really nicely smooths that out, so you get a nice sort of transition, from this thick to thin line. So that's what we're going for. We're going for edges that are just like super nice and crisp. Another way to look at it would be like, it looks like this took no effort, which, it didn't take too much effort for me to lay down a few strokes, but that's sort of what we go for in stylized, or at least what I like with stylized, is that, it looks like it's effortless. If I just made a mark like that. And then come back through. Actually, I should have it saved up here. Just kind of go through with the flatten brush a little bit, orb flatten. Just like that. So just keeping things super, super clean. And you can always go through and you can sort of like smooth this back out, kind of bring that bevel back a little bit. So I think that works out pretty nicely. So now we can take the planer brush again, and let's just kind of like, I like to call this the like the thick to thin approach. So the edge that you're creating is really thick, and then just let it kind of slowly transfer into a thin line. And that just kind of, makes it really, really interesting to look at, instead of having, I know a lot of people will do this where they just kind of, they'll sculpt the entire edge all the way down. For me personally, I like to just add a little bit of variation instead of having one edge be, the same exact width. And it's okay to leave little notches in here. It's like almost like the wood kind of got, carved down a little bit, and then you left a little tiny notch. I think that's probably going to be okay for us. And maybe I'll add another little dip here, and I'll flatten this out. Yeah, something kind of like this, right? You can already kind of see the difference that this is making, just having these edges, slightly sculpted on. I'll just go through and kind of sculpt on that. So I don't mind, for me and how I like to do it, I don't mind if all of the edges are sometimes sculpted, as long as you really play into that like thick to thin line. That way it, just has a nice flow to it. Now I'm just going to show you the example of, how I'm sculpting wood, and then I'll I'll speed the video up so you guys don't have to watch me, sculpt all of this. It's just going to be a lot of the same sort of techniques. I think this is by far probably one of my favorite, techniques to sculpt wood. But I will say this does take, it takes time, it takes a lot of patience, just because it's a pretty precise thing. I think that the less artifacting that you can make when you're doing this, I think the more believable and better presented the asset's going to be in the end. So like we could make this side even thicker, something like that. And that's one thing I can mention too. So how all of these are basically, they're just merged together, so they're not combined. So at any time, if you needed to sculpt an inside corner, like right here, you can just hold Control Shift and Alt and click that subtool that you want to isolate, and just continue sculpting like normal. And I would say, be cautious on sculpting around these super, super pointy sharp edges, just because if you're not careful, you can kind of almost like sculpt it to a point where that edge will almost like pretty much like kind of like bend over, if you will. And if you don't catch it, it can just be kind of annoying. It's not that big of a deal. It basically just means you have to kind of cut that when you see it inside of Maya, when you're doing your UVs, or whatever software you're using. It's always good too. I know that like right now I have the subtool isolated, so I can't really gauge super well the thickness level of this in comparison to the rest of the asset. And what I mean by that is that, if all of a sudden, if I come back out like this and I unsolo it and I start looking at how small these bevels are in comparison to the rest of this, like, yeah, I think that these bevels could probably stand to be a little bit thicker. So it's always good to just kind of start one when you're looking with the rest of the asset in context. And let's go ahead and get these like kind of inner corners here, these little inner edges. And this is something that I thought about too, actually. Let me kind of talk about this. So you notice how I just isolate this. So there's two ways that I could approach this right here, because normally wood is cut. If this was the actual wood plank when they were building this, the wood would potentially be cut right here and here. So this piece right here that I just highlighted, this would be its own piece. Then you'd have a piece that would go like this, probably. It might come at an angle like this. And something like that. And then it could even do something like this. So when you're thinking about the construction of the objects, you see how like right now in my mind, this makes a lot more sense. I think in the concept, it is probably not this way, but you can see, and actually it potentially it could be. We'll take a look at that together in a second, but just based on my knowledge of what I know about how, wood cabinets or doors are built, they're usually built out of multiple pieces of wood. Otherwise, if it wasn't built like this, what I could potentially see this, and also, because it's stylized, you can kind of fake reality. It doesn't have to be perfect, but this whole thing right here, like this, and even including this right here, could all potentially be one solid plank. So if I kind of draw this, so pretend that this is like the wood grain lines going down. So all of this, all the way down here, like this could all be one piece of wood going down. And then potentially this part could have either been carved in a little bit, or it could have been a completely separate piece of wood. But let's take a look at the concept. So I can see here, this almost looks like it's got another, variety of wood right here. Like it's got the wood grain is going horizontally, and all of this wood grain is going vertically. So there are no cut lines here, which to me that suggests that this would all be, one piece of wood. But this is stuff that I highly encourage you to think about when you're sculpting, and really give it a lot of thought, because that's going to be what, the difference between what separates a professional from, let's say, like a student. I know that sculpting a lot of wood professionally, or rocks for that matter, like whatever it is, you're constantly needing to really evaluate the concept or the reference that you're looking at. And my approach is, if you don't know, just ask, because there's a chance that the concept artist might be able to tell you that, or you could go find reference of like other cabinets, and in that reference you might find what you're looking for. You might find your answer. So, and one way to just quickly test this, if I was like, okay, well, let's see if we can make some of the cut lines that I had thought about first. So I'm just going to take the dam standard, and let's just kind of make a line. And this is not final, this is just a test. Make a line here. Actually, let's do it a little smaller. So if I were to go ahead and do this, and then kind of look at it like this from a 3/4, I honestly don't really like that. I think that these lines start to, actually I can do this too. These lines kind of start to add a little bit too much extra noise. I think the wood by itself is really big, and it's got chunky forms, and the small detail all kind of goes within pieces like this, or like the rope and the bottles. So let's just keep it to be like one piece. I think that that might actually serve us pretty well in the end here. I'm going to go ahead and do some of like these smaller little pieces here. And this might be tricky only because it is really thin and it's really close to, you know, this other piece here. So, but don't worry, if you see marks like that, there's an easy way to clean them up, and I'll show you that in just a second. So if you happen to make a mark like this, it's not a big deal. This is where you can take the trusty Trim Smooth Border Brush, holding Alt, just select over an area right here and click down and drag, and it'll just kind of like sculpt right over the top of that there. And there you go, it's gone. Okay, so I'm going to go through and I will make sure to sculpt out the rest of these edges here. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and kind of start talking about how I use alpha work for doing stuff like this. So let's go ahead. I ended up getting these alphas off of the ArtStation Marketplace. I've seen a few people make these, and they're just, you know, they're just simple alphas, nothing too crazy, which I have loaded up here. These are just, you know, I put these alphas in my alpha folder. So these are really great. They got a lot of really interesting shapes to them. I'm just going to kind of grab a couple of them. So if I want these linked to my masking brush, which I do, I'm going to hold Control. I'm going to go ahead and double click this alpha here, and notice how it comes in as a texture. That's okay. What we're going to do is with Alt selected, I'm going to go ahead and click the texture. And I'm going to go ahead and say make alpha. That'll drag that into the alpha slot. And we can go ahead and just click on texture and turn that off. So this technique is pretty fun here. What you can do, actually, if you see right now with I just have the freehand selected, so that's not actually going to do anything that we want. Instead, we're going to go ahead and with Alt selected, click this, go to drag rect, and now you'll see if we just drag, if we click on the object and drag, it'll drag from a single point, which we actually don't want that. Or I guess I should say that it tries to pull from where you clicked. So if you drag off of the mesh here, off the subtool, you'll notice that you'll start to actually see the alpha come up. And what that gives you the option to do is then if you just hit spacebar, you can kind of move it around. And I'm just going to kind of line it up. Let's say something, I'm just going to try to get this, this middle section here. Maybe something like this. Maybe something like that. And then let's go through and deselect what we don't want. So let's go ahead and just take this alpha. We're going to turn it off. And I'm going to go through and just kind of holding Control and Alt, I'm going to go through and select out the areas that I don't want to be masked, like this. And it's going to probably mask out the back section, so we're going to just make sure that we clear that. Now what you can do, there's a couple of ways you can do this. I guess a few ways, actually. Let's go ahead and make sure that we get the bottom of this. Go up just a little bit. Okay, the mask is kind of covering these edges. Not a big deal for us right now. We can come back and clean that up later. So one method to project this mask onto the subtool is you can go to deformation and you can go to inflate, and what you can do is just kind of slide this out just a bit. Looks like I missed some of the mask. So let's go through and just make sure we select all of it here. Oh, actually, you know what? It looks like we might need to invert the mask. That actually might be better. There we go. We just had to invert the mask. My mistake. So you'll see that if I go and inflate this way, you see that the alpha starts to come through, but you notice that it's starting to like lift everything out, and we don't want that. Now that's mostly just because of there's parts of the alpha that are on the edges, on the inner edges here. And what I've discovered, what I think is a little bit easier to do than trying to go through and mask out all of the edges, because that can be quite a bit of work, is I actually just inverted the mask. Now I'm going to go and use my clay buildup, or you could use any brush for this really. We could try inflate as well. Might give this one a try, it might be a little cleaner. So I'll use inflate, and I'm just going to go through and I'm going to hold Alt to push the alpha into the mesh, and you'll notice that actually I just looks like the alpha brush went through, or excuse me, the inflate brush came through on the other side. So the way you want to fix that is you want to go to your brush tab. If you don't find yours up here, it's just right here. You just need to click it. If you click into the brush tab, we're going to click auto masking, and we're going to click backface masking. And what that means it's going to do is, if you decide to do what like sculpt in and use a lot of pressure on this side, it will not show through on this side. So for example, I'm going to press in, and now nothing happens. So let's just kind of go through here and mask out, or I guess push into our mesh here. And I'm going to increase the intensity a little bit more. There we go. Now it might be a little bit too deep. What you can do to check this while keeping the mask on is if you go to the side here and you hit masking and then you click view mask, the mask will still be there, you just can't see it now. So now you can continue to kind of go through, and this kind of allows you to see like how much pressure you're putting on, and you don't have to really get, the mask won't get in the way. And don't worry if you don't, if you're starting to hit some of the edges, that's okay. We're just kind of looking at this right now. You could definitely be a little bit cleaner with your masks, especially on the sides here. That way you don't have to necessarily, you see how I'm starting to put little divots and stuff inside of these edges. So if you want to be a little bit cleaner and tidier with your masks, I highly encourage you do so. To fix that, you might just need to come in with like a trim smooth border and just kind of go over the tops of this here. So again, it's not the cleanest way to do stuff, but just for demonstration purposes, and just kind of showing you that if this happens to you, you just gotta kind of power through a little bit. And then of course, one thing you could do after you have the alpha down is you could actually just go through and do a clay polish. I'm actually going to need to remove the mask on here first. So what a clay polish will do is it's going to just basically kind of do a quick smooth on everything, but I don't think I want to do that for this. I think just going back over it and smoothing out some of this is probably going to be a better bet. And I'm just going to kind of back up a little bit to where I can see the mask again. This time I have the clay buildup. I'm just going to use the clay buildup and kind of go through here with this brush. So I just really like these alphas. I haven't really mentioned the aesthetic of these, but I just really like them. I found them, and I feel like it just really adds this nice whimsical sort of woody kind of feel to it, and I really enjoy that. So, but yeah, I think this works. So if we want to move and do, let's say, all the outer sides here, we're just going to need to be pretty careful about how we select all of our edges. So I'm just deselecting all the areas that we don't want. And we'll just get rid of the sides here. We'll try this for now. We'll see if that works for us. Okay, now we're going to inverse that. And let's go ahead and try, maybe we could get a different alpha in here, because we definitely don't want to use the same one over and over, though we certainly could if we wanted to. So actually I haven't used, let's use something like this here. Okay, so again, we're just gonna drag and drop all the way. And instead of just dragging over the entire thing like this, which probably won't work because we're just, it's kind of stretching the alpha a bit too big. So what we'll do is maybe we can do this like piece by piece, something like this, and maybe something a little bit like that. So this actually might work. I know I masked some of it out, but I'm okay with that for the most part. Actually, it looks like it just kind of masked. I still have this mask, so that's actually pretty good. So let's just take our clay buildup, and we're just gonna kind of lightly go over some of this here. It's a little tricky. I got a little close to the edge. Not a big deal. We'll just kind of sculpt that in for now and see what that gets us. Again, you see how we're running into this issue of this edge. Not a big deal. We might just go through and sculpt a little bit until we meet that corner and then stop and kind of try to sculpt around it for a minute. Again, taking off the mask view and seeing what we have. Yeah, it might be a little bit too close to the edge, so I might fix that, but I might not. I might leave it. Let's just keep going. Let's see where this ends. And remember, you kind of want to stop when you get to the top here. We don't really want to sculpt on the top of this wood piece here just yet. I prefer using this method over the inflate for pieces like this, mostly because I feel like this is what gives me the most control. I think inflate can be good because it's kind of this universal control that will inflate everything equally, which is great, but sometimes you just don't get that level of like finesse and control that you would want. And obviously, you know, artists should definitely have control over their work here. Make sure that the software is not controlling you. And yeah, this is a process, you know, it definitely takes time, but the end result will speak for itself. You know, there is definitely, you can go through and sculpt a lot of this by hand, and I highly encourage it because I think it's good. It's a good exercise, but in this case, I think this will do. This is starting to really kind of shape up nicely. Has a really nice sort of fantasy, whimsical feel to it. So let's go ahead and let's talk about some of these edges. So you can see how some of these edges just kind of, they end right here. It kind of looks weird. It's not really necessarily like finished per se. Just looks kind of weird. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the orb brushes, as I've mentioned before. This time we're gonna use, let's see, he's got a lot of the, let's see where they are, orb slash, these kind of brushes. So I like using these in pretty unique ways. And like this is pretty much an area where I'd want to use one of these, is to basically like help sell the idea that this thing kind of penetrates the wood and it also like kind of ends. So this might not be the best one. Actually, we'll clear the mask. And we'll just kind of place this, start to place it down. Doesn't have to be final, but just get a sense for what that could look like. I think the intensity is a little bit too much. So you could do something kind of like this, and then again, use the trim smooth border and clean up the bottom piece here. Just kind of sculpt in some of this. So that way it kind of looks like it's starting to, like, it has a clear indication that this, you know, kind of penetrates downwards instead of it being cut off. So down here, actually, this might be a better example down here. So you'll see that I can just kind of drag this along just like that. That way it's not weirdly cut off, right? Maybe we could put this down here. There we go. So I was asking myself earlier, like, what the time difference of using a method like this versus hand sculpting, and I found that this probably cuts my time by definitely more than half. So like if normally this piece I'm working on, let's just say for time's sake, that this would take me an hour to sculpt this entire side of the door, right? Like if it took me that long, with this method, I mean, this probably takes me, it'd probably take me like 25 minutes, like realistically. So obviously the result definitely speaks for itself. Let's go ahead and move on to this section here. I know I haven't completely finished up all of these sections here. That's okay. I'll get to those. Let's try this one more time. Make it a bit thinner. I think that'll make it easier for us. And again, I haven't done this method really before, so it is an excellent learning opportunity for me. I think that kind of works. And of course, just running this back through, smoothing it a little bit. And you know, honestly, like, it doesn't have to be this like super perfect, you know, flawless looking thing. I think having a little bit of like this undulation and unevenness, you know, that can be okay. I'm not going to try to sit here and be a total perfectionist like I normally would be. And I'll make sure to kind of clean this up. Again, just using the trim smooth border can get you really, really far. So using the same methods that I used before with using some of the orb slash tools to sort of go through and kind of fix some of these areas, I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Now that you've just kind of seen my process for doing one of these doors, so I will go ahead and speed the video up, and when we come back, I will sort of talk about everything that I did, talk about if there was anything that came up that wasn't addressed before or that I thought about, and just kind of, you know, explain the process that I experienced as I was sculpting this. All right, welcome back, everybody. I hope that you enjoyed that speed recording video. So as you can see, that was a lot of wood sculpting. You can see that the techniques that I used were the same as I showed earlier. Not a whole lot of things that I did differently, to be honest. I realized that the bevels that I needed to make were probably going to be a little bit bigger than what we started out with. And that's okay, because that's, just getting a sense of how big things needed to be early on was really helpful. So I didn't really feel the need to come back and correct any of these bevels too much, just because I felt like they were probably going to be good enough. But going through and making sure that the bevels on all the wood were, were bigger. One thing I realized too, and I think I discussed it earlier, was that there was a few times where I started out just doing laying down the alpha and pushing that through, and then come back and doing the edgeware. And I found that doing that was a lot harder because once I had laid the alpha down, it was hard to kind of come back and sculpt on top of that alpha. So the order of operations that really worked well was sculpting the edges and then going through with the alpha and laying it down, because then that way the edges, that foundation's already laid down. One thing you might have seen me do is I had looked at one of the meshes and I found that it was actually dynameshed together. So one thing that I did was just basically take that same mesh back inside of Maya, and actually I can show you here. I believe this might have been one of them here. I believe this was one, and all I did was accidentally dynamesh the meshes together like I mentioned before, and didn't have the undo history to go back and do it. So I just basically, just exported this out of Maya, sent it to ZBrush, and then from there, just redid it and redynameshed the proper way. So just wanted to clear that up. That is something that did happen during the sped up video. Now I want to talk about things that I would probably do different at this stage. I'm noticing that the wood grain itself, it does work for the most part. I think that it's getting a good result, but I think that the crevices, it's pretty noisy in terms of like how deep these edges and the wood grain's going, which is something that I noticed. I'm not too concerned about that because I know what I can do later is I can go inside of the normal map file and just kind of edit it down a little bit, so that way the actual normal of the wood grain is a little bit less. That way it's not as prominent, but that's just my take on it at this stage. I think that when I get into Substance Painter and I start texturing it, I think that a lot of this might end up getting, kind of hidden a little bit. So that is something that I wanted to go ahead and, make light of. So let's go ahead and talk about one of these last little wood pieces, like the carving element of it. So looking at this, we can see that Maeve had pointed out that there is this carving call out. And if you look, that call out is right here on the intersection of this door. And it definitely could be on this side of the door. I think that it makes sense that if someone were to open these, that you'd see these, like potentially two of these little symbols. But I think for now, I don't mind having just this symbol being on this door, because I don't necessarily know what's on this side, and that's okay. One of the things that I do to get something like this, instead of actually hand carving it, which is something I used to do, just kind of going through and trying to make this shape in ZBrush by hand is pretty difficult because it's very specific and it's got a lot of really cool edge control. So I wanted to make sure to basically copy this like as close as I possibly could. So I'll be honest with you, this is not a crazy interesting technique. How I take these things, if concept artists do this, if they make certain callouts of like whatever it is, I literally will take my screen grab, something like this. I could even actually just zoom in a little bit more. So take a screen grab, and copy that, and then I go into Photoshop. As you can see, this is the end result that I have. But basically, come in here and I scale this up to kind of fit the screen a little bit, and I just use selection methods. I won't go too far into that because there's a lot of different methods you can go about selecting the actual blue color. So I'm going to go ahead and show you sort of like what this looks like before it's this stage. Actually, Orb did a really cool write-up about how to turn black and white markings into alphas. So I'll just go over that really quickly, but you can see if I turn off the layer effects, this is what I ended up copying over. So it's pretty close to one-to-one to what Maeve had done. What I had done was simply, let's go into our effects here by double-clicking on the layer. If you go to Inner Glow and we click on this, the opacity is set to 100%. The blend mode is set to screen. The technique is switched. It usually comes in as softer. I switched that to precise. And basically, you just need to set the size of the bevel. So you can see here, this is dictating the inner bevel size. So I just picked what I thought would work, and that's it. That is literally all you have to do. And from there, what I did was basically ZBrush likes PSD files. I wish that it liked Targa files more, but PSD is what we're going to work with. So simply save this out as a PSD. It really doesn't matter too much what your resolution is, as long as it's high enough to actually read what the alpha is. I believe this is just a 1024 by 1024. And so once you have this, let's go back into ZBrush. I'm going to go ahead and just select a brush that I don't use very often to take this alpha. So I'm going to use the clay brush. And let's go ahead and let's go to, let's go to alpha. Let's go to import, emissive callout. All right, so now that we have it, let's go ahead and switch our stroke to drag rectangle. And since it's right here is where the little imprint is, so let's go ahead and just solo it. One thing actually I want to mention this really quick now that I'm about to lay an alpha down. You see how I have my perspective turned on? Make sure when you're doing all of your projections with the wood that you have perspective turned off, because having a little bit of perspective can make it really challenging when you're trying to snap your camera. Like there's going to be a little bit of perspective associated with that. So just keep that in mind. Go ahead and turn that off. Okay, so let's go ahead and snap this. And right off the bat, I'm just going to go ahead and lay it down. So it looks kind of interesting so far as far as like what's happening with the alpha stamp. You'll also notice that it's coming through on the opposite side. So like I mentioned before, if you just go to your brush up here, brush tab, scroll down to auto masking, and let's check back face mask. So now once we put it down, nothing will come through, just like we want. So let's go ahead. I'm going to make sure I have the concept pulled open just to see what it looks like. So it'll end up probably going something like this. A couple things I want to do. I want to make sure that the intensity is set up a little bit higher. And let's go ahead and open up our alpha tab. Let's go to modify. And the only thing that I touch in these settings is the mid value. Let's go ahead and take that to 100. So let's go ahead and just drag this out again. Get it somewhat in the middle. I don't think it actually needs to be too big. Let's do something maybe like this. Let's see what that looks like overall. Yeah, I don't know if my OCD is kicking in and wants it to go into the direct center. I think I might just do that instead. Yeah, something maybe like that would work. And then of course you can always go in and smooth this out just a little bit. Probably too much. Just a little bit, not too much though. So I think what I could do is I could probably add a couple of little wood grain notches, but honestly, I think it might be okay. I think that if I have a bunch of wood grain right here, it's probably going to take away from this alpha, so that'll be something that I can keep in mind for later. Now, I don't have any sort of like noticeable edge wear. Actually, let's bring this over here. You see how we have like some of these notches in the wood? So those are pretty nice. I think we could try adding in some of those if we wanted to. I know that those are pretty popular with, with stylized art. I definitely have added a few of these orb slash brushes before in my time. So if you want to, you can definitely go ahead and, lay a couple of these slash marks down. I think it can be cool when it's used appropriately, when it's used, I guess I should say when it's used sparingly, because a lot of the times on almost most stylized art I see, it doesn't matter what the object is, whether it's a rock or if it's a plank of wood or something. I'll usually see a lot of stuff like this, or like you see the edges here, and you want to be really careful about using those, just because it is something that gets used a lot. Just be aware of that. So if you want to go ahead and let's go ahead and turn on our back face masking. And I'm going to place them, you see I'm placing them like right where like these notches are. So they definitely make sense there, I think. Sometimes backface masking you'll have to turn off and on because sometimes you do want the alpha to go through all the way. Yeah, you can see, I mean, I know that if I took more time, I could, you know, get some of these alphas like perfectly stamped down, but overall, like, I don't think that, in my opinion, like, this doesn't add a whole lot to the overall aesthetic of this. I think that sometimes it can take it away, but you can see I'm very biased on using these, but I do love them. Like, I have to say, I do love using these. So that kind of wraps up how I like to sculpt wood using this method. I think that what I learned is that this is a really, really powerful method of doing wood. It can do it so quickly, and the results are really nice. I think that if I were to come back and do this again, I'd probably slow down just a little bit more and really think about how I'm using these and making sure that the intensity is set right. But I really do think that this is a really good place to be in the sculpt at this point. I am actually happy with the result. All right, so hopefully you all learned something from this, and I will see you in the next video.